So, um, wonderful. Well, yeah, welcome everyone. I'm Day Cooper Hagel. I'm the Director of Mental Health Wilderness First Aid, and I'm very excited to have Michael McCarthy with us. So Michael is from Heshkwit and Nuuchahnulth First Nations, and I will share my screen for just a moment, actually, to show folks where that is, because I imagine it may be that not everyone knows. So we're over here on the west coast of Canada, and I used to live in Tofino, where this little pin is, and now I'm over here in Courtenay on the other side of the island, waiting for my new son or daughter to be born, which is exciting, but different time of life. But so for almost 3 years, I lived on the west coast of the west coast. It's about as far west as you can get before you're in the Pacific. And I was down here in Nuuchahnulth. This is Tofino. So Tofino's well known in Canada for, its big surf beaches and very, very popular tourist destination, all that kind of stuff. Has everyone been to Tofino? Anyone? No, okay, great. Rachel has. Anyway, it's very well known. But so this is where our main office was when I worked with the Nuuchahnulth Tribal Council. Michael was our regional coordinator, and so I was a clinical counselor there. And so that's our office. But what we actually did as clinicians is travel around to different nations on the West Coast. And so the Nuuchahnulth Tribal Council consists of several different, about a dozen different nations along the West Coast. And so I was serving Nuuchahnulth First Nation, which is where Michael is partly from. And I also, at least twice a week, I would get into a water taxi and head out on the water taxi to this little nation of Ahousaht. I say a little, it's actually the biggest one in NTC. And so I'd go there and provide services for the day and then come back. And some of our clinicians would head out either in a boat or in a float plane out to Heshkwit First Nation, which is also where Michael's from. And it's also where the hot springs are. So it's a very popular tourism destination. But so that's just a little bit of orientation. But yeah, Michael is our regional coordinator. So we had a really unique team in that the team was composed of clinical counselors like myself, who have more of a Western orientation, training, clinical background, university education, all that kind of stuff. We also have child and youth counselors who have a variety of education background and training. And then we also have cultural wellness workers or COASA wellness workers. And often those are folks who have been trained up in cultural ways or traditional teachings, sometimes elders or sometimes almost elders. And so we had this really wonderful, diverse team to be part of, and Michael was heading it. And so I just remember, Michael always sitting us down for staff meetings or bringing us together and really emphasizing the ways that our different backgrounds and skills complemented each other, and that the work that we were doing was really walking in two worlds, as he said. So I'll just read a little bit more about Michael, and then we'll see what's going on. So this is from the full disclosure. This is from Michael's LinkedIn profile. So let's see what your LinkedIn profile says, Michael. For the past 30 years, Michael leads with cultural best practices, is well organized, has a highly developed success in consciousness, creative. He's focused on a new economy of knowledge, networking, and compassion. Michael lives the actions of a hero and believes in the philosophy, own your body, own your mind. It's also notable that Michael was a truth and reconciliation educator for many of the clinical providers for the truth and reconciliation process, as well as he was the regional and provincial MC for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And one of the things that he was just telling us in preparation for tonight was, during the TRC, there were fires that were lit and they went all around Canada. They took these fires and these flames, and a big part of this was sharing stories, right? Coming together and sharing stories around these fires, and that being part of a healing process. And he was speaking about this is an ancient process, right? We come together around fires and share, and that does a lot of things. It helps us connect, and it also helps us heal and learn from each other. And no matter where our ancestors are from in the world, all of our ancestors had some kind of practice around coming together around a fire and sharing stories. So one of the questions that we were thinking of for tonight is, how do we get back to these practices and how do we integrate them into our modern life? The other thing I remember Michael always emphasizing when we were together was something that he called Granny's teachings. And I imagine he'll talk a little more about that tonight, but the teachings that he learned from his grandmother specifically. And then also, there's a bit of a bigger concept around what are the teachings that we carry forward from our ancestors. In 2009, he actually published something called Granny's Teachings through the School of Communication and Culture at Royal Roads University. And I'll drop the link for that actually in the chat, just in case.
Yeah.
Michael, I found this stuff online, so it's all public. It's going
all public knowledge. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, it's all over the place.
Yeah, so that is there if you'd like to check it out. But I remember him saying things like, don't miss the tide. This is one of our teachings. Don't miss the tide. And this is very true if you're a kayaker or you're out there in the ocean. It's like, the tide is not going to wait for you. You've got to have your stuff together, be organized, and be in tune with the world around you. Talking about the value of cultural practices, I always remember Michael talking about the value and the importance of family. Family comes first. And there were a couple times where, I had duties as a clinician, and then a duty with family came up, and Michael was always very supportive. Hey, your family comes first, go take care of your family, and then we'll figure out how to support you in your clinical duties. I already talked about walking in two worlds, weaving the intersection of, traditional practices, cultural teachings with Western clinical knowledge, and really having them complement each other, sitting in relationship with people that we're with, really taking the time just to be present and value that time. And this, what we're going to hear a little bit more about as well, sharing stories around fires. So without further ado, hopefully that's just enough. But Michael, thank you so much for making time for this. And I'll pass it over to you to open in a good way. And then maybe we'll just hear a little bit more about who's here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. So I always frame my work around Granny's teachings. Granny was influencing my life from a very, very early age. And she's with us. My Granny's been gone a long time, but everywhere I go and every time I present, I always make sure there's a few extra empty chairs for the ancestors to come and join us. And so Granny would say, Michael, before you do anything, speak our language so the Creator hears you better. So I want to open us up in a really good way today. And whoever your higher power is, just reflect on that as you hear my words. I'll be speaking in my language, a prayer that opens us up to this conversation that we'll have today. And what I really want you to do is just sort of sit up straight, because anytime I was with my Granny and I sat with my Granny, you automatically had to have like this sense of properness with you. And so whenever I speak to my Granny, I always end up sitting up straight automatically, even without, without consciousness. And if I was slouched over at an event, my Granny would just touch my back and I'd sit up again. So I just want you to take a deep breath in through your nose, out through your mouth. You can have your eyes open or closed, whatever is most comfortable for you. Again, in through your nose and exhale out through your mouth. I'm going to exaggerate this last breath. Chuaslipiawal. Waikashnasallipiawal. Flakwana hatwear. Kasientli maxti. Hakapin hatwear. Chamapi api. Hathlapi hatwear. Hathsu is hatwear. Heyahi. Hatwear. Hathsu. Hatwear. Hathlapi Api hot with. Atsu is hot with. Heyahi hot with. Atsu. Chu atlabi hot with. Waikashnas atlabi hot with. Chuko aklik nanyaksu. Chuko aklik. Paksap tashiakin. Chu unatlabi. So I just ask the Creator to join us and the ancestors, whoever those ancestors are, to join us in our respective spaces, wherever we are. When I sing or chant, we invoke the ancestors to come. We invoke them to come and sit with us. When we sing or chant or show our masks, our dance in our cultural ways, we collapse time and space and allows the ancestors to join us. So that's what that prayer was. That's what the chant was to invoke the ancestors to come. So I really appreciate that I was able to share that with you. Dave, back to you.
Klecko, Michael. That was beautiful.
Awesome. Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. So I'll start with my granny. My granny was a big lady, big in the sense of her personality, but also big in the sense that she was physically big. When I was younger and a child, I could not put my arms around her because she was so big. And so when Granny laughed, her whole body laughed. And when she would invite me into her house, Granny would always give me a big smooch on the cheek, because we have grannies that are like that. And she smelled of Noxzema. I don't know if you know what that smell is like, but that's the smell of my grandmother when I think of Granny. And she would always teach. And we had to sit and listen for hours. Hours we'd have to sit and listen when I was a young boy. And so when I was a young boy, days where we'd have to see Granny all the time, but often as a young boy, I wanted to stay home and play hockey or watch cartoons. And so we'd have to go and visit with her. And some days I didn't want to be there. And you could see it in my face as I grew older, as I became a preteen and a teenager. It was not easy to hide my displeasure of having to be with my granny on a Saturday for 6 hours and just sit and listen. And she would look at me and she would say, "Grandson, go to the water and listen," she would say. And that stuck with me for a very long period of time. And what I realized from that experience of going to the water, she never framed how to go to the water and listen. She just told me to go to the water and listen. And so I would do that in my early years, in my teen years, and I still do it today because I'm very fortunate to be blessed to live here in Tofino. And I go to the water every day and I still listen to the water. And so as a young person going to the water, I would listen to the wind, thinking there was some ancestors trying to contact me. Or I'd listen to the waves, thinking that there was messages in there. I'd listen to the animals and the birds. So I listened to all these things, and I would still have no frame of reference as to what she wanted me to listen to. Fast forward into psychology and neuropsych, biopsych. I went to study psychology, and then later on studied communications at Royal Roads. In one of my neuropsych classes, the instructor started talking about biocycles, biorhythms and biocycles. And I was in, as a young person in school, highlighting all the things that my instructor was talking about, getting ready for the exam like everyone else is. And then he started moving off topic in terms of not reading directly from the book. And he started talking about rhythms and cycles. And the first rhythm, and we attune to that naturally. We attune to rhythms and cycles as humans, something that we can't avoid. And one of the things, the first rhythms and cycles that we attune to, and I'm so happy, Day, you're pregnant right now. So this is so relevant. Our unborn children attune to a mother's resting heartbeat. So a mother's resting heartbeat is less than 60 beats in a minute. 60 beats a minute. And so we attune to that. And so when we go to the beach or a moving body of water, we attune to the rhythm of the waves. So as the wave comes up, wave goes out. Wave comes up, wave goes out. Wave comes up, wave comes out. We attune to that. We cannot avoid it. We attune to it. And I looked up my book. I'm like, oh my God, my instructor sounds like my granny in so many ways. So when I think of our cultural practices, our clinical practices, as Day says, walking in both worlds, we need to look at the science behind what makes us attuned to nature around us. But also, we need to have that conversation with the environment. And that conversation where we have to be vulnerable to engage in that conversation with the environment. So as a healing practice, when we go to the water and listen to a beach or a moving body of water, we automatically attune to that environment. And all of a sudden, my respiratory rate slows down. My heart rate starts to drop. My blood pressure drops. And then all of a sudden, the things that were cluttering our mind become very clear. So I was like, wow, as not just Indigenous people, but people wherever our culture is, pre-industrialization culture, we had these methodologies that allowed us to be healthy. It's just a matter of remembering how to get back to those places. So that's Granny's first lesson. Go to the water and listen, grandson. So one of the things, if anything today, I encourage you to go to the water and listen without any frame of personal, would be the correct word, judgment on yourself. So if we go to the water without judgment and just listen, that is the medicine that we need. I'm going to add a little to this to help sort of strengthen my Granny's teachings. When Dave was talking about our organization, the Nuuchahnulth Tribal Council, we were very small at one point in the early 80s. And now we're this very large machine that has, my department has 42 employees that are clinicians and culturally based. But in the 80s, our annual general meeting's coming up. It's coming up in October. And I would take my granny there, I'd sit her down, get her cushion. You want some tea, you want some coffee, and get her water, and doing all these things that a grandson's supposed to do. And then all the chiefs got in the room and they were debating, the direction of our organization, where we need to go. Across the hall, Health Canada came in to present. Our president and vice president, or back then they were called chair and co-chair, were sitting on the other end of the hall. And then all the chiefs were in the room, and grannies and elders were up on the stands, and I was there with Granny. And the chair and co-chair are banging the table. We need to control our own money so that we can help our people. And they're pointing fingers at Health Canada. We need control of our people who are dying. They were just banging the table. I'm really emotionally upset. It ties into what we're in right now in terms of the pandemic. It's a very emotional time for us worldwide with what we're going through. So people are very emotional. Chair and co-chair were, banging the table and showing emotion. And my granny, she leans into me and she says, "Grandson, what we had was right and proper." And I'm like, wow. And so what she was referring to were all the practices that we did as Indigenous people that kept us healthy and safe. All pre-development, pre-industrialized communities, regardless of where you're from, had practices that kept you healthy. We just need to remember those practices. So for us, being Nuuchahnulth, being on the West Coast, going into the water, cold water, immersing ourselves was a way of our healing practice. And so when we go to the water to to bathe in ritual ceremony, whether it's a ice cold river or whether it's the ocean, each have different meanings behind it. One is to let go of things, one is to ask for things. So if I go to the water in the river, I'm actually going there to let go of any of the pain that I have and any of the grief that I have. And we dunk 4 times. And in our part of the world, we have spruce. Spruce is very sharp and prickly. And we use the spruce to bathe ourselves with and hit ourselves. And in a sense, it's allowing us to take that pain or whatever's attached to us away. We dunk 4 times, and there's prayers and there's rituals and there's a chant. And then we throw the bow into the water and it goes away. And when we dunk under the water, and for those that go and use cryotherapy or cold water therapy, the first time you dunk under, full immersion, under the water, and you come out and you go, and you have this convulsion, this involuntary vocalization. And my teachers would say that it's me letting go of the things that I needed to let go of. And this is the interesting part. Our brain chemically does not understand the difference between that sound from a deep grief cry or being immersed in the water. It sees it the same. Chemically, it sees it the same. So this is the reason why when we do those rituals of cold water bathing and we make those sounds that are involuntary, and then we come out of the water, and my granny's teaching was you feel a lot warmer when you come out, and it's a natural response of being in that cold environment. And she says, you're in the hands of the creator when that happens. And so you have this ability to go in the water and make those sounds, but the brain chemically and mentally can't make the distinction between that and a big grief cry. And so we naturally feel much better in the process of doing this. And I'm so happy Days started this teaching in the beginning of new moon. I think the new moon was it's today, I think. No, it is today. It's today.
My yoga teacher said it was today.
Yeah, so I'm so pleased. Ancestry, the more we do it in concert with nature and the environment around us, the more connected we are to nature. So it's going back to that vulnerable conversation. And it is a vulnerable conversation to have with nature when we immerse ourselves in water, or when we go to our practices that are within our heritage, that is nature related. And so when we do the ritual of bathing, and where I'm from, it's a way to truly maintain that good mental health. So all the work always happens between the new moon and the full moon, all the good work. And we're getting into fall, we're getting closer to winter, where all of my rituals become even stronger. And so I'm so happy that, Day has picked this time to start these trainings and these teachings, because it's so powerful to start on the full moon or on the new moon. And that's one of the things that, Granny would always say. She would be always telling me, when you go and bathe, grandson, humble yourself. Humble yourself to the creator. I mean, that's the conversation that you have in those ceremonies, where we're asked to let go of the things we need to let go of. One of the other things that I'll share some of the biggest teachings, but then I'll recap it and just sort of give you a high-level summary of what we talked about, and then we can go into questions, say closer to 7, is that correct? Yeah. And so I think this society has not, this modern time, we've been distanced from that connection to land and that connection to culture. One of the things that I tell everyone that is in my team, or if I'm teaching, larger groups or communities, is to walk barefoot in your territory. And that's something I think we need to do a lot more of. It sounds so simple, just to walk barefoot in your territory. It sounds so simple, but it has such deep meaning. And we're starting to find more science behind this. And hopefully they're going to be doing more research around it. And it's, I think the term that David Suzuki has said, it's called earthing. Going out and reconnecting to land. And so I walk barefoot in my territory all the time. And it's that one way of that remembering. When we do these things, it helps us remember those teachings. So we all have this ancestral knowledge in us. It's just that we need a primer to allow us to experience it. So the more we do these things that are naturally based, the more these teachings will find their way to you, or that you will eventually remember, or that you heard from your grandpa or your grandma or an aunt. So what these things do is allow us to go to a place in our memory of a time that, oh, you know what, there was that one time my uncle was whittling a piece of stick and he was sharing a teaching with me. So all of a sudden, when we get ourselves to those places of contemplation, walking barefoot on a beach or on a trail, we start to remember these things in a very organic, natural way. And I'm sure Day knows the term. When we are barefoot, there's a terminology of walking on a trail. Fox, is it fox stepping or fox? Where we're kind of gingerly walking. I remember seeing a document on when we were doing Man's Health programming, it was brought up how to walk on a trail. And so during one of my Man's programming for Man's Health, I was barefoot on a trail. And I was like, oh my gosh, the path is soft. And of course, you got to be more cognizant of where you're stepping. I think that puts you in a more connection to the land and having that vulnerable conversation with the environment. So water, go to the water and listen. Walk barefoot in your territory are the two biggest things that I want to share. And the other one, and I'm so glad Day lit a little candle for us. And when I was, long ago, when I was a counselor for the province and alcohol drug programs in BC, my granny said, grandson, light a candle in your room. And I said, okay, Grandma, how come? She goes, long ago, if something good happened or something bad happened, we gathered around the fire and shared our history. I used to say we shared our story, and my uncle Shane corrected me. He goes, Michael, stories are like the three pigs or Goldilocks. He goes, we share history. And so when we gather around a fire, we share history. And so when we started Truth and Reconciliation Canada, and we started having these conversations about truth, one of the things that came up in the discoveries, in what we were doing, we realized we needed to have a sacred fire at every event throughout Canada over the years of Truth and Reconciliation. And so when we lit the fire, the very first fire, we ended up taking the ashes of that fire and put it into the fire of the next gathering, wherever that was in Canada. So eventually, we made this sacred fire that was brought throughout Canada, where people were able to share their truth about residential school. And so the last fire was lit in 2015, I believe. The last Truth and Reconciliation gathering was in Ottawa, and the 98 recommendations came out of that. And that was the last fire that was lit. And I was there for that fire. And when we gather around a fire to share our history, it's something that just brings meaning. And I don't know, you know, Lisa, you were talking about climate change, and climate change has impacted healing practices that are very Indigenous based. Sweat lodges requires a lot of fire to heat the rocks. So climate change has impacted that. When the BC-wide fire ban just was on for several months, I have a fire, I have a sacred fire at my house. I have it often. And people, and this is interesting, if you light a fire, guaranteed, at some point, someone's going to sit with you, no matter what. Somebody's going to see your fire and they go, oh, there's a fire over there. What's going on? Guaranteed. If you light as many fires as I do, I have usually three people a month come over to see what's going on. And we have to invite them. We have to invite them in. We have to sit them down, have a conversation. And this is what I love about fires and the fire conversation, because when we gather around the fire, we share our stories, we share our history. And there's something about the sound, the crackling, the movement, the glow, all these things have an impact on our environment and on our conversation. So prior to coming back to the Nuuchahnulth Tribal Council, I was with BC Center for Disease Control and developing men's health programs. And so the theme that we've that evolved from this were sacred fires that the men were bringing back to the communities. And so each community that came and joined our training program and our modules all went back and developed gazebos, places of gathering, places to share the fire experience. And I actually have, I carry all the ashes from those fires. I carry it with me to help me remember all those stories and all that history that was shared near the fire. So go to the water and listen. Walk barefoot in your territory and light a fire. However that shows up in your life, whether you go to a river, whether you go to a lake, whether you're walking barefoot in someone's territory, it's a way of connecting. The other messages that I wanted to share with you today, my uncle, who's a big influence in my life, Uncle Shane, and Dave's probably heard of Uncle Shane and some of his teachings. Uncle Shane is always correcting my course. Michael, come here, I want to talk to you. And he will correct me. And so Uncle Shane, Michael, I'm going to share a lesson with you. I'm going to give you 3 rules of life. Oh, cool. What is it, Uncle? He texts me all the time, sharing lessons and teachings. Modern, you know, he lives in Vancouver. I live here in Tofino. And he goes, Michael, first rule of life, got to have fun. Got to have fun. You need to have fun, Michael. First rule of life, got to have fun. In a way that's not harmful to anyone, but lifts them up. That's the additional framework that I use. Got to have fun, Michael. Second rule of life, be generous. Be generous. Be generous with your time, be generous with your teachings, redistribute your wealth. Whatever your wealth is, redistribute it. Whether it's a teaching, a story, a song, a belief, a value of goodness, redistribute that wealth. And the third and most important rule of life, and never forget this, Michael, is always say yes. In the sense that, and this is my additional framework to it, saying yes in where it uplifts others, where you're lifting them up in a good way, and does not cause harm to someone else. So those are my uncle's teachings that I wanted to add to this, and I have about 8 more minutes, but I thought if it's okay, I could share a story from here, from Heshquit. It's related to going to the water. And then we can have some open questions here in a bit. And I really just wanted to thank you at this point for being such good listeners. And I know in this modern time, it's hard to sit for a long time and listen to somebody talk. And when I was a young person, you know, all the years of sitting with my grannies and my aunties and my uncles and them speaking in our language for hours. This is hours. I can't tally up how many hours I sat alone with my elders. And Granny, hardly any of them spoke any English to me. But when they did, they would say, "This is going to make sense later in life, grandson." You know, and they were right. Oh my gosh, they were so right. It did make sense later in life. It's the tools that I redistribute to my team and redistribute to you guys that are so generous, spending time in learning. And so I wanted to tie in the framework that I learned all this under. In my language, it's himwits or stories. So this one is actually from Heshbut and goes like this. Fairly short, it's really short. Long ago, there was a chief, and this chief, he wasn't very humble. This chief had 10 sons. One day, the chief got up and said to his oldest son, "Son, I want you to go get a whale so we can feed the community." Son puffed up his chest and said, "I'll get a whale in 4 days. Not a problem, Dad. I won't fail you." So he hopped in his canoe, his chuppets, his whaling canoe, paddled out to where the whales would be. Spent 4 days out there, couldn't find a whale. Not one showed up. Came back home and he said, "Dad, I'm sorry, I couldn't find a whale. I'm so sorry." So the chief went to his second oldest son and said, "Son, your older brother couldn't get a whale. I need you to go get a whale so we can feed the people." Son got excited and proud. "Dad, I'll get you a whale in 2 days," he said. Hopped in the canoe, went out to the whaling ground. Nothing. Couldn't find a whale. Came back and said, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I couldn't find a whale." Chief went to the third oldest son. "Son, you need to get a whale. Your 2 older brothers couldn't do it. I need you to get a whale." So the son goes, "Dad, thank you, I will." The 2 brothers started to tease him. "You can't get a whale. You're not even a fisherman. You can't even hunt," as brothers do. He went out, also failed. The chief went all through his sons, finally got to the baby of the family, the youngest, and said, "Oh, by the way, I'm also the baby in my family. I'm the youngest of 7. Very true. Chief goes, "You're my last hope. You're my last son. I need you to get a whale for us so we can feed the people." 9 brothers, as brothers do, laugh, tease. We're just putting him down. "You can't get a whale. You should just go out gathering roots with Granny. You're not even a hunter." All the bad things were coming out of the brothers. And the young man didn't pay any attention to that. The young man went to the river. There's a river just in Heshbut. Went to the river, really cold river. Went to the river and started to sika, to pray. To pray for ihtup, to pray for the whale. Sika, ihtup. The young boy gathered medicines and he brushed himself off and he prayed. And as he was praying, this hayaklik came up, swam up the river. Hayaklik is like a serpent. came up, popped right up in front of him and started to speak to him. He says, "Put me around your shoulders and I'll help you." And the young boy did. Put the serpent around his shoulders and finished his prayers. He was chanting away. The same chant that I started with, chanting to the sky chief, the horizon chief, the water chief, the earth chief. Started praying. And as he was praying, that Hayaklik, that serpent that was around his neck, transformed into a thunderbird. He transformed into a thunderbird. A young man transformed himself into a thunderbird, and he could fly up. He flew up from the river, flew up over the village, and from that great height, he could see where the whales were. So he swooped down, grabbed the whale and brought it back to the beach and put it down on the beach. And as he put that whale down on the beach, that young man transformed back into his human form. So the value of going to the water and praying, even if you don't immerse yourself all the way in this modern time, if you just go to the water and put your feet in and reflect on your day, or if you're brave, it's between the new moon and full moon, and you fully immerse yourself in a safe way and dunk your head underwater 4 times, I'm guaranteeing it's going to transform your life in so many ways, just as it did that young man in that story. So that's what I'll recap. Go to the water and listen. Go to the water and listen. Light the fire, whatever that fire is. Uncle Shane's teachings. Always have fun, be generous, and always say yes. Walk barefoot in your territory. Those are the natural things that kept us healthy in your own worlds, in your own cultural ways, from where your family is from, your ancestors are from. We had those practices. You've had those practices. And it's up to you to remember those practices. And I'm so grateful that you're here. Please be generous and share your teachings with others after today. And I'll say, Chu Unatlapi. That's, in my language, it means enough said. Right at 7 o'clock. How about that, Dave?
Wow. I was gonna say, don't worry about the time. I think it's more important, like you're saying, to be in relationship. Wow, thank you for being so generous with your teachings and sharing with us, and to your Uncle Shane and your Granny Louise, and for all of the networks that you've been part of. And, let go. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Dave, back to you. Is there anything that you wanted to do in this section and what time we have left?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to we'll kind of open it up, and maybe we'll do some small group. It seems a little, I don't know if we'll put people into breakout rooms, given that there's only 5 of us.
Yeah.
This chat. We'll do some more Q&A and just discussion and that sort of thing. You really made me think. I forget what course the 2 of you were part of, Mark and Lisa. I think it was either January or February, wasn't it? It was quite early this year. I think I see Lisa saying January.
January, yeah.
Yeah.
I believe it was January.
That's wonderful. So you 2 were both part of that kind of first class that was the big push after we got in with Outside Magazine, and it kind of the word spread, which was really interesting. So one thing that we've added to the class since then, which wasn't part of the class in January, when we talk about lizard brain interventions, when we talk about interventions just to help people ground themselves, ground their nervous system energy, kind of help that lizard brain just to settle a little bit more. In January, and probably up until, I don't know, April or something, Rachel, we were talking about breathing interventions, cognitive interventions, mindfulness interventions, and tapping interventions. And those are all great interventions. And we've added a fifth category, though, which has really been inspired partly by my work with Michael and some of these traditional teachings as well, which is physical interventions. And so that includes a whole range of things from yoga to going for a walk or a run. But it also includes, we talk specifically about cold water immersion, partly as a traditional practice and partly as a modern practice, that it's both going to the water and getting in a physically safe way. Oh, so powerful, such a powerful intervention. Or another kind of smaller way to do it, like Michael was saying, is sit by the water and just put your feet in, especially if it's ice cold water. That'll bring your nervous system right down. Or another way to do it is hold on to an ice cube. Another thing we talk about is walking barefoot on the land, which is a teaching that I've been gifted with from Michael and Granny Louise. And there's other things too that we can do, but for a lot of people, they find those physical ways of grounding and engaging to be so powerful in the moment, either as a lizard brain intervention or as a practice that we do kind of regularly for wellness.
Okay, may I add a little thing to that? You're walking on the land and sharing that experience. In the summertime, we had a great summer here with the full moons. And for those people that have, when we're connected to the cycles of the moon, between new moon and full moon, on a clear night, on the full moon, when it's super clear in the summertime, and you get that dew on the ground, on the grass, in your yard, in your field, that dew shows up. Oh, walk barefoot in that. In our way, it's a matter of connecting with the moon energy from the night before. So you have this ground, and the moon has such an effect on us. As bodies of water, as we're bodies of water, we're so connected by water. So when we're actually walking the dew of the full moon, it has this, you just got to experience it. I can't explain anything from it other than my experiences by walking on the grass in a field from the dew of the full moon. There's just some connection that happens. It's a bit deeper. I just want to add that. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I also, Michael, while you were talking about fox walking, is I believe what we used to call it. And I don't know if anyone's seen this book, The Coyotes Guide. Have you seen that, Michael? Yeah.
Fox walking, that's what it is. Yes.
Yeah, this is a book that we used to refer to a lot when I was an outdoor educator up at Strathcona Park Lodge, especially if people were really into Coyotes Guide. And it's written by someone named John Young, and there's a couple other authors too, but John Young's the most well-known one. I'm just dropping it in the chat right now. But he talks specifically about these nature-based practices and getting back to our senses, fox walking, and what was the other thing he said? He has a whole chapter on storytelling as well, and engaging audiences through storytelling, but like using storytelling to connect us and around a fire.
Wow, I'm gonna
Maybe we can just open up a little bit more and kind of see where the conversation kind of goes. And I know we jotted down a couple of kind of prompts and ideas, but maybe it can just be a little bit more organic for a bit. Yeah, other thoughts around stories or connection practices, or like Michael was talking about, the power of, having a fire and bringing people together, connecting with self, connecting with creator, connecting with nature, connecting with each other, connecting with ancestors.
I would be interested in hearing people's experiences. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I loved one of the things you said, Michael, about I think it was your granny saying, giving you a teaching and then saying, this might not make sense now, but it's going to make sense later in life. And I was just reflecting on that and wondering how many teachings from my grandparents and parents, have I kind of had one in one ear and out the other. And, now I'm starting to integrate it more and recognize the value in that. And when I speak to my nieces and nephews, and when I speak to my daughter or son when they're born, it's like, how much are they going to absorb and how much might they reflect on later?
Oh, you're muted, Michael.
Yeah, sorry, there we go. That would be, it's amazing how much we do recall in those moments. Our brain is so cluttered often with other things that we think is important. And so in those quiet spaces, when we attune to nature, we allow space in our brain to remember those teachings.
Michael, I had to laugh at your uncle's gotta have fun. This is what my husband says to my kids before we, send them out. They're on their own. They're going to go do something. They need to make wise decisions. Because I'm more of the type that's like, make sure this and that. And my husband goes, okay, what's rule number 1? He's like, you got to have fun. And you can't have fun if you're dead. So they got to make wise decisions so that they can have the most fun.
Oh, that's awesome. That's beautiful. I'm glad that that's a teaching in your household.
If I may speak on teachings and how you mentioned and Dave touched on how it'll make sense later in life. So I have a daughter, she's 12. Her and her mom live in Campbell River now. So last month I took her to Tofino. I used to, in the early 2000s, I lived in Tofino. And so we went and crashed in the waves at Long Beach and
Wow.
Bay. And so I was teaching her, I was thinking of how I learned certain things earlier in life that came out later and made sense. And I appreciated as an adult lessons that I was kind of irritated to learn as a kid.
Yeah.
And so I was teaching her in that manner last month that, you will understand what I'm saying and appreciate later in life.
Yeah.
So that was a blast to be back down there. But I really appreciated also what you said about carrying the ashes of one fire to the next, and then those cumulatively to the next. And that's a very powerful idea. I think that's I've never thought of that, and that there's real power to doing that, in the sense of weaving the fabric of the past and present.
Yeah.
That's just amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you for bringing that to me.
Thank you for sharing that with us. That's it's one of those experiences that the moment we do consciously collect and carry, we're consciously collecting and carrying that experience to share with others. It becomes meaningful, and even more meaningful the more fires that you're able to collectively share with one another. It's such a beautiful practice. Environmental change has impacted that this year with the BC-wide sort of fire ban, especially here on the island. I was saddened that and then when the day it got lifted, I was having a fire right away, and people came right away. Day knows my little space. I live in a tiny space, and it made it more intentional. And I think that's what we need to do is make these things intentional, whatever it is. is that full intention to it allows us to have those moments together. And so when we do something that has intention, whether it's a moment, if we set our framework around that, if we set the intention, we can accomplish so many things. That's my dog, Jimmy. He's wondering.
Yeah, I love that piece around intentionality. I think it's such a concept behind, things like mindfulness and just planning and having a direction, for life, or having something you're aiming at, or whatever it is. It's like, do it with intention. I wrote down something else you said too, because I loved hearing you speak, because it just brought me back to all of the times, that we were together in a staff meeting or in a presentation or something like that. And I just recognized, like, oh, all these little teachings, that Michael has passed on over so much time, and you managed to condense so many of them into an hour. It was wonderful. But you said something from your Uncle Shane, which was, lifting people up in a good way. And I was just reflecting on all of the ways that you did that for us as a team. I've worked for a lot of different folks, and everyone has different styles, but I remember that about working with you, and when you would go to our higher ups, or you would be talking about your team in kind of the larger full nation gatherings. You would always make a point of lifting us up as a team and saying something you really appreciated about each one of us, or like when one of us would come in and introduce to someone new, right, you would always say something really positive about that person. And even when there was correction or redirection to be given, right, it was always given in a way of like, I say this because I appreciate you and I respect you, and I want you to be the best that you can be. And I mean, we do that hopefully with kids and clients and anyone we interact with, but I really love that teaching of lift people up. Whenever you can, go out of your way to lift them up.
I think, our old ones, whether they and I'm talking everybody's background, I think we did that naturally. We needed to do that, and I think in this very modern time, we forget that. We forget the value of gratitude, the gratitude I have for another person. And so when we do the open appreciation and lift them up, it does something that is also course correcting for ourselves and reaffirming that I'm here doing my best.
It directs our attention as much as it might direct them to see themselves in a particular way too.
Any other thoughts or questions before we wrap this up? Our reflections, actually.
Michael, I love aquafit. I've been doing aquafit for many years, and I just love it. And I live really close to an outdoor pool. And so in the summer when that's open, I do it there. And I especially love in an evening class when it rains and it's cooler. And it got me thinking. And for years I said, I'm going to start doing aquafit at the lake, because I live in Maple Ridge and I am surrounded by just beautiful lakes in my own city. And so I finally started doing that this fall.
Wow.
And I've heard Dave talk about, and I've heard even you talk about this idea of going in cold water. And I've got to tell you, I mean, I don't know what's traditional about aquafits. I'm not trying to make any claims, but something about being in that water is just, I come out afterward and I can't even put words to how I feel. It's just so invigorating. Yes, physically from the exercise, but it's much, much more than that, because I feel invigorated from, you know, an aquafit class at the pool. So if I compare the two, you can't, yeah, kind of what you were saying, you can't really put words to that, but something very transformative happens, and I'm just hooked. Like, I just love it. And it's just so, it's kind of beyond words, right? Or even pre-verbal, however you want to describe it, but it's very transformative on a different level than just the exercise. And so I've been taking notes of all the things you've been saying, because I'm like, what else is like going to transform me?
Oh, that's so wonderful, Rachel. I think that's amazing that, we have I know there's some more science coming out of this, especially out of Europe. You know, they've been doing a lot of cryotherapy and therapy in cold water. And so there's something definitely happening, you know, I think within the levels of the skin, and of course with the cardiovascular system, and the values of health that comes from it. So it's an emerging science, but it's actually an old science for thousands of years. And all of a sudden they go, I think there's something to this. What's this all about? And so, I'm so excited that you're experiencing it. And this is what the water is about. It's about moving it around in the values that we have and where we're living. You can do it anywhere. Yeah.
That's so interesting that you mentioned that, both of you, because I specifically, I'm trying to write like one article a month, like a short-ish article, but one that we can put up on the blog and send out in the newsletter and just kind of have a discussion about something. And so my topic I've been wanting to write about next has been cryotherapy. And it's been really difficult to find clinical research on cryotherapy, specifically around like mental health and emotional health. And it's like, there's so much anecdotal and cultural knowledge and teachings around the benefit of it. I experienced it very powerfully myself. I used it on myself just 2 weeks ago. I had a really emotional experience. It was completely overwhelming. And I was like, I'm going to the river. I'm going to the river. And I just like, get in the river. And I love what you said about the breathing. Because we talk about that a little bit with the brain, to certain parts of the brain, if we have an experience and another person has the experience, it's the same experience to that part of the brain because of how our mirror neurons function, right? And so it's so interesting that you say that, the deep breathing or the controlling the breath or the involuntary breath, it's the same to the brain if that's an emotional experience versus a physiologically generated experience. I'm just so curious. Maybe I'll do more research on, if I can find some European databases, maybe that'll give me some more info. But it's like, what an amazingly powerful practice that is underutilized in our society, right? That cold water.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see more of it. I'm happy that people are recognizing it. I had a question for Lisa.
Okay.
In the Coast Guard, did you have to do any cold water experiences?
Well, we had to do like an annual swim test where we had to float around in our survival suits. But that's kind of the length of it. I actually, I find it fascinating. Like just going to the water and listening is really, it's just an incredible teaching. Because while I was in Kodiak, Alaska, I actually took up cold water surfing and bodyboarding.
Wow.
And it was quite the experience. I don't know how else to describe it besides it was like a way to come back to myself and kind of even step into my power. So my time in the water in Kodiak was really beneficial and really healthy for me. So it's just so cool to see all the connections in that. It's cool to connect your experiences to ancient teachings and all of this. It's nice.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a big surf culture here, and I understand that completely in terms of a healing practice. And I know we're supporting those ventures now here in our region, surfing and healing, because there's definitely some evidence base from people who went to Afghanistan, who were surfing in California and experiencing the healing practices of the water. Yeah. Thank you, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments that I can add before we wrap this up today?
If I could ask, I guess it's a question, but you mentioned the word clutter or kind of mind clutter.
Yes.
Is there a simple or historically, is there a traditional method of decluttering?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. I think going back to lesson 1, going to the water and listening, those moments of just attuning to nature and the sounds of nature, whether it's the river or a lake or the ocean, it allows the brain to automatically let go of things. In Zen philosophy, there's a thing called thinking about nothing, which is kind of a very rare place to get to. But when I go to the beach and the wave comes up and the wave goes out, it's the gap between the waves that I sort of sink myself into, and I allow the day to go away from me. And then I observe without judgment. And to observe without judgment is a big thing to happen. Jimmy, my dog, he loves to observe without judgment. And so he's been my teacher. He's literally been my teacher at the beach. And so he will automatically want to watch the sunset. What dog watches sunsets? And so we do our walk, we find a spot next to the bushes or a log to sit on, and we just sit and watch. And it's in those moments that all the clutter that was in my brain diminishes. And I think that's the reason why I go to the water so much. It's a daily thing for me. And when we do that, it allows space to open up in other areas of our life. So if we're too cluttered with things that are occupying our mind in our space, the spaces in our mind, we don't allow things to enter that are truly meaningful. And so, when you came to Tofino and was with your daughter on the beach and playing on the beach and running in the sand and in the water, those are moments that you have. And it's in those moments that you are truly being present. And I think that's the one thing that we forgot how to be in this modern time, is to be present. Be present with our spouse, our partner, our kids, and for me, present with my dog, Jimmy. And so he's the one that teaches me about observing without judgment with myself. So continue the practice and just observe without judging. Think about.
Sorry, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, that was the last of it. It's like thinking of nothing. So difficult to do.
I was just gonna observe that I forget if it was yesterday or the day before, but Facebook went down for like 8 hours.
8 hours.
Yeah. And in some sense, how great was that? I just really I wonder if there's any traditional this is tongue-in-cheek, if there's any traditional teachings about Facebook use.
Yeah, it's been a modern thing that came up, and like how do we get back to the place of sitting like I did for endless hours with grannies and grandpas, we don't often get that, and I think that's missing in our life. It's those values that we need to bestow to share with our children, our grandchildren, and I think that's what we need to get back to. And so anytime the power goes out here, interfering, which happens a lot. Last year we had like 5 or 6 power outages. I love it. I just turn on my fires, I relax, don't have to do anything. Yeah. Hopefully we'll have a place where young people remember to sit with their elders. Yeah.
Rachel, you look like you were about to say something right before we wrap up here.
Oh, I was trying to see if I could form it into something, and I don't know that I got to that point yet, but some of the stuff that Michael was saying was really making me think of my husband. He's been really into, and I'm sure there's an actual quote or phrase that I was trying to come up with, but anyway, this idea of being connected to everything but attached to nothing.
Wow.
And I liked a lot of the stuff you were saying, Michael, was really kind of fleshing out that idea, kind of like on the things that you let go, but it's not connections that you let go, right? So it's like relationships with everything, but the things that you hold on to or clutter you in that way, but you can let go. So
Nicely said.
Teaching in a lot of practices is that commitment to action, but the renunciation of being attached to the outcome, or renunciation of attachment.
Yeah.
Well, let's just take a moment of real mindfulness and presence. So like Michael was saying, let's be mindful of our posture, be mindful of what Granny Louise would say about our posture. Might she tap us on the back or on the shoulder? And take a nice deep breath right into your belly. And then when you exhale, just feel yourself sink into your body a little bit. And with that next deep breath, just pay attention to any little movements your body's asking for. So you've been sitting for a while, maybe that's a stretch, maybe it's a movement. Deep breath into your belly. And when you let it out, just let go of something you've been hanging on to. Let go, Michael, for being here, sharing your teachings and your community connections. And we can continue the conversation, I'm sure. Really appreciate everyone's time. Lisa and Mark for showing up again, and Rachel for helping keep things running in the background here. Last words, Michael?
I just want to appreciate everyone. Thank you for your time, effort, and attention. Please redistribute your wealth and knowledge to others. And I'm so appreciative to everyone here and the work that you do. So thank you so much for healing others and healing yourself. Untitled Chapter.